Candace Rogers, known to everyone as Candy, was born on July 18, 1949, in Spokane, Washington. She was the only child in her family. Not long after her birth, her parents separated, but her father remained in Spokane, allowing them to stay close and spend time together regularly. Candy was a bright, kind-hearted girl who loved the outdoors. She spent hours outside with her friends, exploring nature and playing with her beloved dog. Like many girls her age at the time, she dreamed of joining the Camp Fire Girls, a popular organization similar to the Boy Scouts, but for girls. The group focused on outdoor activities, practical skills, and community involvement. In 1959, when Candy was 9 years old, that dream came true. She officially became a Camp Fire Girl, and she was thrilled. One of the group's key activities was selling mints to raise funds. The girls were given boxes of sweets and assigned specific streets to canvass, going door to door to offer them to neighbors. It was a structured effort, carefully planned to avoid overlapping routes. On Friday, March 6th, after school, Candy was scheduled to sell her mints. She came home, had dinner, played with her dog, and around 4 p.m., she grabbed about 8 boxes and headed out. Her plan was simple: walk the nearby streets and offer the treats to familiar neighbors. But as the hours passed and daylight began to fade, her mother started to worry. Candy was supposed to be home by 6 p.m., but there was still no sign of her. With growing concern, her mother and Candy's grandfather set out to look for her. They walked the streets of their neighborhood, retracing the likely paths Candy would have taken, but she was nowhere to be found. Soon, neighbors and family friends joined the effort, combing the area on foot. Despite their best efforts, not a single trace of Candy turned up. That night, her mother made the call no parent ever wants to make. She contacted the police and reported her daughter missing. By the time darkness settled over Spokane, the sense of unease had deepened. It was becoming increasingly clear that something was seriously wrong. The police joined the search quickly, beginning with door-to-door questioning of neighbors in the area. Early on, they learned that Candy had only managed to sell 1 box of mints. That suggested something may have happened to her shortly after she set out. Still, one resident reported something curious. They claimed to have seen Candy on a nearby street around 6:30 p.m., nearly half an hour after she was supposed to be home, and during the time her mother and grandfather were already out searching for her. Candy's grandfather had his own unsettling account. While walking that same street, he was nearly struck by a car that sped around the corner and even jumped the curb. He didn't catch the license plate, but he did remember the make and color, a green 1953 Ford. Police circulated a description of the vehicle, but it yielded no leads. Then, around 9 p.m., officers discovered several boxes of mints scattered along the road near a bridge. They were easily identified as Candy's. The discovery escalated concerns, suggesting she may have been taken, or worse, somewhere near that spot. Police concentrated their search in that area, scouring both sides of the riverbank and combing through the adjacent wooded sections. Officers and volunteers continued searching throughout the night, but there was no sign of the missing girl. By morning, news of Candy's disappearance had spread rapidly. Local newspapers covered the story, and soon it reached statewide media. In 1959, a child vanishing near her own neighborhood was an extremely rare event. Spokane hadn't faced anything like it in years, and the community was shaken. The next day, authorities ramped up their response. More officers were deployed, along with mounted police, off-road vehicles, and even military personnel who joined the search from the air via helicopter. Volunteers flooded in from Spokane and nearby towns, eager to help. In total, more than 1,000 people joined the effort, making it one of the largest search operations in the country at the time. The area being searched extended across an 11-mile radius from Candy's home. And yet, despite all of it, there was still no sign of her. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. That same day, tragedy struck again. One of the helicopters assisting in the search clipped a set of power lines and crashed. Of the 5 crew members on board, 3 lost their lives. The news devastated the already shaken community and underscored the seriousness and scope of the effort to find Candy. Despite the dangers, the search pushed on for days, but no new signs of Candy emerged. Police officers worked around the clock in rotating shifts, determined to bring her home. In just the first few days, investigators received nearly 750 tips. Each was thoroughly checked, but none led to Candy. The case seemed to be growing colder by the hour. Then, 15 days after her disappearance, a break came. By chance. 2 military servicemen from a nearby base were hunting in the woods west of Spokane when they noticed something unusual on the forest floor. A pair of small children's shoes. Both men had helped in the search for Candy and immediately recognized the potential significance. They notified police. The shoes were shown to Candy's grandfather. He didn't hesitate. They belonged to his granddaughter. Police mobilized and launched a search of the wooded area. It didn't take long. Within minutes, an officer spotted a small foot protruding from the underbrush. It was Candy. Her body was found beneath a layer of pine branches, concealed in a shallow spot among the trees. The medical examiner determined that she had been strangled with a torn piece of fabric, later identified as part of her own skirt. Injuries to her wrists and ankles showed she had been bound, though no restraints were found at the scene. The examination also revealed the heartbreaking truth that Candy had been sexually assaulted. Nearby, officers recovered a green car seat cover. Though suspicious, they couldn't confirm whether it was connected to the murder. On Candy's clothing, they noted a small purple stain that emitted a faint smell. Grape-flavored chewing gum, possibly. But once again, it was a clue that went nowhere. Despite the body being found and the cause of death confirmed, investigators were left with no viable leads. They continued searching, desperately, hoping to uncover anything that could point them to Candy's killer. Investigators worked tirelessly, following up on an overwhelming number of tips. They looked into neighbors, drifters, known predators, and anyone with a criminal record who might have crossed paths with Candy. As the days passed, the list of persons of interest continued to grow. Before long, attention turned to a 50-year-old man named Alfred Graves, and the reason he became a suspect was unsettling. On the same day Candy's body was discovered, Graves took his own life inside his car. The location was particularly troubling. It was near the spot where Candy's mint boxes had been found. Even more concerning, Graves lived just a few hundred yards from Candy's home. When officers searched his vehicle, they found a length of rope and women's hairpins. That prompted a search of his house, where detectives uncovered a disturbing collection of newspaper clippings, all focused on sexual crimes against women and girls. Several women had previously accused him of harassment, and even his own wife admitted she had long suspected him in Candy's disappearance. Despite the red flags, investigators couldn't find any concrete evidence linking Graves to Candy's murder. There were no physical traces, no witnesses, and no confession. While they couldn't confidently clear him, they also couldn't prove he was the killer. The case didn't stop there. Detectives continued working through an ever-growing list of suspects. By the end of that year, the file spanned multiple pages, each name carefully reviewed and investigated. But time and again, the leads ran cold. Eventually, another name caught their attention. Hugh Morris, a man later arrested in 1961 for a series of violent crimes. Two factors made him a compelling suspect. First, Morris was known for constantly chewing grape-flavored gum, a detail eerily similar to the grape-scented purple stain found on Candy's clothing. Second, he had murdered 2 women in Spokane just months after Candy's death. It was enough to raise suspicion, but once again, police lacked the evidence to make an arrest. Hugh Morris had a long and disturbing history that began early in life. His first arrest was for assaulting a woman, but instead of facing serious consequences, he was simply discharged from the army, where he had been serving at the time. Not long after, he committed a series of robberies in Los Angeles. For that, he served just 6 months behind bars. After his release, Morris lured 2 8-year-old girls to a secluded location by offering them ice cream. He was arrested again, but remarkably, he once more avoided prison. A medical board ruled that he was a sexual psychopath, and instead of jail time, he was committed to a psychiatric facility. 2 years later, doctors deemed him cured and released him. He moved to Spokane, where his behavior quickly escalated. He began peering into women's windows, and by November 1959, just months after Candy Rogers was killed, he broke into the home of a 28-year-old woman, assaulted her, and left her dead. 10 months later, he did the same to another woman. Then, a month after that, he attacked a third victim, this time stabbing her repeatedly. She survived. After that last assault, Morris fled the area and went on a crime spree across multiple states. His violence escalated, and the FBI eventually added him to its 10 most wanted list. He was captured soon after and ultimately received multiple life sentences. Detectives working Candy's case visited Morris in prison, hoping to get answers. But he denied any involvement in Candy's murder and agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed. Still, investigators were cautious. Polygraph results aren't admissible in court and are far from foolproof. Despite Morris's violent history and his presence in Spokane at the time of Candy's death, there was no physical evidence tying him to the crime. Later, investigators turned their attention to another potential suspect, 49-year-old Howard Barnett. In February 1960, just months after Candy's body was found, Barnett was arrested on suspicion of assaulting a minor. Days later, he died by suicide in his jail cell. Before his death, Barnett scrawled a haunting message on the wall in his own blood. "I have a sin before the Lord." When police informed his wife of his death, her immediate response was chilling. "Did he kill that girl?" she asked, referring without hesitation to Candy Rogers. Detectives launched a full investigation into Howard Barnett's potential connection to Candy's murder. He remained one of their primary suspects, largely because he lived just one street over from the Rogers family. But once again, despite their efforts, investigators couldn't find any solid evidence linking him to the crime. Over the years, the case remained active in some form, with police continuing to chase new leads and re-examine old ones. At one point, a woman came forward claiming that on the day Candy disappeared, she had seen a green car following the young girl. Investigators renewed their focus on tracking down that specific vehicle, but the lead went nowhere, and the timing of the witness's statement, coming years after the fact, raised its own set of questions. In the decades that followed, the case was reopened multiple times. Each time, detectives would start again, reviewing files, re-interviewing witnesses, and hoping for a break. But progress was slow and often non-existent. Strangely, the case also drew a wave of false confessions. Over the years, 13 individuals claimed responsibility for Candy's murder. In every instance, investigators determined they were lying. None of them could provide details that weren't already public. Most repeated facts found in newspaper articles, and none revealed anything only the killer would have known. As odd as it may seem, this kind of behavior isn't uncommon in high-profile cases. For reasons still debated by psychologists and law enforcement alike, some people falsely confess to crimes they didn't commit, seeking attention, suffering from delusions, or trying to escape their current circumstances. Meanwhile, the case continued to move from one detective to another. With each transition, new eyes brought renewed hope that someone might finally uncover the truth. But Candy's murder remained one of the most haunting and unsolved cases, not just in Spokane, but across the entire state. Its impact was far-reaching. Before Candy's disappearance, children in Spokane played freely in the streets, explored the woods, and walked to school alone. But after that March evening in 1959, everything changed. Parents grew more cautious, trust gave way to fear, and the city's sense of innocence was never quite the same again. In the early 2000s, the investigation into Candy Rogers' murder was reopened yet again. This time, a new detective took the lead and decided to apply modern forensic technologies that hadn't existed at the time of the original investigation. Thankfully, the Spokane Police Department had done one thing exceptionally well back in 1959. They had carefully preserved all the evidence. That diligence paid off. Forensic experts were able to identify a sample of male semen on Candy's clothing, preserved across decades in storage. Analyzing the degraded sample proved incredibly difficult, but after considerable effort and the use of advanced techniques, scientists managed to extract a DNA profile. The sample was uploaded to the FBI's national database in hopes of finding a match. But no match came back. Undeterred, investigators began the painstaking process of comparing the DNA to profiles from dozens of former suspects. One by one, they were ruled out, including Hugh Morris, the man many had long believed to be Candy's killer. The forensic evidence made it clear he had no connection to the crime. Once again, the case hit a wall. Investigators now had the DNA of the person who had sexually assaulted and murdered Candy Rogers, but no identity to go with it. In 2021, the case was reopened yet again. A new detective stepped in and decided to take a different approach: genetic genealogy, a technique that had revolutionized cold case investigations in recent years. By tracing distant relatives through family tree databases, this method had solved hundreds of cases across the country. There was renewed hope it could finally solve one of Spokane's most enduring mysteries. The detective contacted several specialized laboratories, but there, he faced another crushing setback. To perform genetic genealogy, labs needed to work with the original DNA sample, and by this time, the decades-old semen had degraded significantly. Multiple labs attempted to extract viable data, but each concluded the same thing. The sample was too damaged to process. The breakthrough they had hoped for was, once again, just out of reach. With other labs unable to help, the detective turned to one final laboratory. A last-ditch effort that unexpectedly produced the breakthrough they had been hoping for. Using advanced forensic tools, the experts were finally able to recover enough genetic material from the degraded sample. They extracted a viable DNA profile of the unknown perpetrator. That profile was then uploaded to genealogical databases, initiating a complex search for any distant relatives of the suspect. After painstaking work analyzing thousands of potential matches, investigators were able to narrow the field to one specific family. Within that family, detectives identified 3 brothers as potential sources of the DNA. But there was a new complication. All 3 were deceased. Still, investigators pressed on. They discovered that one of the brothers had a daughter. Police reached out to her and explained what they had found, that her late father might be the man responsible for the murder of Candy Rogers. Shocked and devastated, the woman nonetheless agreed to help. She provided her own DNA, and testing confirmed she was a close relative of the person whose semen had been found on Candy's clothing. Armed with this evidence, detectives obtained a court order to exhume her father's remains. Forensic specialists extracted a DNA profile, and after 62 years, the identity of Candy Rogers' killer was finally revealed. His name was John Hoff. The DNA was a perfect match to the sample collected from Candy's clothing in 1959. Despite hundreds of suspects investigated over the decades, John Hoff had never appeared on law enforcement's radar. But once his identity was confirmed through DNA, detectives turned to his background and uncovered a troubling history. At the time of Candy Rogers' murder, Hoff was 20 years old and living less than a mile from her home. He was serving in the U.S. Army, stationed at a base near the location where Candy's body would later be found. 2 years after the murder, Hoff was arrested for a violent crime. He had bound, sexually assaulted, and attempted to kill a woman, but she survived. For that attack, he was sentenced to just 6 months in prison and was dishonorably discharged from the military. Following his release, Hoff started a new chapter. He married and raised 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters, and appeared to lead a quiet, uneventful life. He held a series of jobs, and at one point, while working in a food packaging plant, he suffered a serious chemical burn to the face, leaving a permanent scar. His life ended in June 1970, 11 years after Candy's murder, when he died by suicide. He left no note. As detectives dug deeper, they discovered that Candy may have known her killer. She had been friends with Hoff's younger sister, who was 10 years old at the time. All these years later, that same sister recalled crying in her brother's arms after learning that her friend had been murdered, never suspecting that he was the one responsible. Tragically, Candy's parents never lived to see the case solved. Her mother passed away in 2006, and her father died by suicide in 1963, just 4 years after her murder. Though the exact reasons remain unknown, many believe he simply could not cope with the grief of losing his only child. After more than 62 years, the Candy Rogers case was officially closed, making it one of the longest-running investigations ever solved. It had passed through generations of detectives and endured decades of dead ends. At the press conference announcing the killer's identity, only one officer who had worked the case back in 1959 was still alive to witness the moment. Standing before cameras, he said simply that he thanked God for allowing him to live long enough to see the truth finally come to light. As for Hoff's daughter, the woman whose DNA helped solve the case, she initially struggled to accept that her father was responsible for such a horrific act. But as the evidence became undeniable, she publicly acknowledged the truth. She called her father a monster who had stolen the life of an innocent child and expressed deep sorrow that he was never held accountable in his lifetime. In an unsettling twist, Hoff had taken his own life at the very moment his daughter turned 9 years old, the same age Candy was when she was killed. Whether that was a coincidence or something more meaningful remains unknown. And perhaps, after all these years, that's one of the many questions we'll never have an answer to.